Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you with us, particularly during this time of, I think, what this panel is about, which is anti-Blackness, anti-Brownness, histories of violence that we see both unrolling in terms of the demographic of who voted in the election and who they voted for, but also police brutality. I also want to recognize the Native people and the Native lands on which all of us are sitting on and pay homage to them. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shanti Parikh. I go by she and her. I'm excited to bring this panel to you, and this is based on a forum that we did for American ethnologists called the Ferguson Forum. I'll put in the chat the link to it. It is free access. And let's see how I do that. All attendees. So we welcome you to share it, to use it for teaching. It emerged out of all of our involvement with the Ferguson protests. JB and I are both academics. JB, raise your hand. We're both academics and we were participants in it. We were not leaders, and we were so inspired by how artists and leaders in the movement were just like anthropologists. They were archiving what was going on. They were ethically representing Black death, Black joy, Black solidarity. And our task was to see how we can bring a partnership and a co-production in expressing what it meant to live in St. Louis in a place where anti-Black violence is baked into the very history of the creation of this space, and how the police from the slave patrol to today were meant to protect white subjects from Black and Indigenous bodies and protect white landed owners, and how that spills into the articulation that we see on police violence. And on the other side, how Black and Brown and white collaborators sought to resist and reshape space. And we were extremely inspired by creatives such as Dee Nichols. Raise your hand, Dee. And I'll just go around and let everybody introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll move on. So Dee.
Hi, Dee Nichols. I'll share a little bit more about myself later.
Hi, JB Kwan, and I'll also share a little bit later, but it's a privilege to be here.
Shiraz.
Shiraz Gorman, and I will also share a bit about myself later.
David.
Oh, okay. I'm David, and David Kirkman, filmmaker, and I guess we'll talk a little bit later.
Gina, did you go?
No. Gina Athena Ulisse, anthropologist, artist, anthropologist. More later.
Okay. JB, you want to say something before we turn it over?
Oh, his mic function. JB.
Unmute yourself.
Sorry, the muting issue. I do that in my classes all the time. I just want to say that it is a privilege, and it's been a privilege to work with such amazing artists, scholars, activists for the AE Forum. And I wanted to say that I continue to draw a lot of inspiration from the work of our co-producers, especially given the specific time that we are doing this presentation. There's this temptation to, I think, to want to go back to this normalcy, but I don't think there is a going back. And especially if normalcy, and for many of us who have lived in St. Louis and continue to live in St. Louis, if it means white supremacy and death for Black and Brown people. So there are many lessons I've learned and many more that I'm learning. And I think the one thing that I learned is that it's not enough to just survive. And the artists and activists remind me of the possibility and how we may create moments and instances of thriving. So while we framed our forum around Black death, we shouldn't forget Black life. And that these lives are made and affirmed in struggle and not in the absence of conflict or violence. Their work, I think, creates a Black sense of place. And this I take from Katherine McKittrick. And I want to end my introduction with a brief quote of hers. A Black sense of place locates the ways in which anti-Black violences in the Americas evidence protean plantation futures as spaces of encounter that hold in them useful anti-colonial practices and narratives. And thank you. I think David is next.
Are we showing the video now? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So I'm showing the video. Okay. So I haven't necessarily done this on my phone, but we wanted to create a video that really highlighted and showcased what the publication was about. And so here, I'm gonna try to share it on my phone and we'll see if that works. All right, let me know. Here. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So now I have to.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No racism! Police! No racism! Police! No racism! Police! They think it's a game! They think it's a joke! They think it's a game! They think it's a joke! They think it's a joke!
Okay, and that was a little tease at what's to come. And we have so much more that we have to do for it. And I hope that, we'll be able to talk about, Ground Zero and how it affected so many, artivists and academics.
All right.
Froze. So Shiraz, you want to go? I think he froze.
Oh, I froze?
Oh, okay. There you go.
Oh, okay. So no, I was saying that, so that was a little tease at, what's to come. We still have a lot more to do, but I'm very excited about, the opportunity to have, artivists and academics who were impacted by the events of Ferguson and how it really kind of changed the trajectory of so many of our lives and careers and just really how we perceive the world. And so we still have a few more people that we have to interview, but I hope that, it will be good cause for a discussion here.
Shiraz.
Well, thank you, David. Greetings, everyone. My name is Shiraz Gorman, and I'm a poet and author here in St. Louis. And I am going to share with you all the poem that is featured in the journal. So this poem is titled, "We Better Pull This Wire Now." It's an ugly psychology that leaves door looks on Black faces and places salt in the wound of the psyche. The ancient stench throws like an expensive candle and settles amongst our souls. We live with it. It meets many of us before we can get a rhythm in our strides. I've always been suspicious of the notion of looking suspicious because for some folks, that changes all the time. From where I stand, it's either black or brown whose lifeless bodies are lying on the ground or housed in 6x9s, man, woman, child. Guns get drawn with fear-filled questions being screamed or threatening interrogation or cowardly provocation or incomplete silence. I have no idea if Theodore Wafer said anything before taking Renisha McBride's life. Yet all these actions have one thing in common, a mission to kill, to claim a life thought unworthy. We continuously get our pride stripped. Camera phones capture the instances for the world to critique just how responsible we were for our own demise. Assigned guilt because we got ghetto sounding names. School records and social media histories get pulled, placed before the court of public opinion to justify our hunting down in this place. The psychological pressure is keeping pace with the heat that rises. And I hear this snapping sound, and I hear this snapping sound. I hear this snapping sound. I saw sparks fly from that young man's mouth as he screamed, "Why?" I saw his mother attempt to beat the pain out of her chest, her heartbeat, a thunderous war cry, her tears spiked crystals. I saw his father attempt to straighten his back, but the pain hit him there in that spot, folding him in half, and I bet God is getting an earful tonight. History cycled around with enough warning. Those who cared to listen, we felt the crescendo coming and attempted to brace ourselves with logic, with reason, with mind, body, and soul. Ain't this the trippiest shit in town? Black and brown lifeless bodies on the ground for a relic reason. And I'm waiting on easier and brighter, easier and brighter, easier and brighter. Better shine a light while we have time, because our children are watching and they have bags under their eyes. Better shine a light because they doing it all in broad daylight and ain't even trying to hide. Better shine a light because I hear this ticking sound. I hear this ticking sound. I hear this ticking sound. We better pull this wire now. Thank you. So to give you a background of how that poem was written, I was sitting at my dining room table. I used to live in University City in St. Louis. And all of a sudden, my phone started going off. And I'm getting text messages and images from friends. And they're like, it's a body laying on the ground. The police just killed a boy. And I had been working on this piece for a while. Actually, it was kind of the birth of it came from working on a project with a friend of mine, Christopher Birch, in San Francisco. And I kind of got into a bit of a writer's block. And at that moment, sitting down at my dining room table, the poem literally started to write itself. Because when Michael Brown Jr. was murdered, I was just days away from getting ready to commemorate the 1-year anniversary from my own brother, John Gorman, being killed. And I just remember being in a state of saying, there is no going back. This is the moment. Because to have a body laying out there for hours on end, like my phone, the notifications kept going, that his body was still out there. And for me, I'm just thankful that I was the vessel that those words came through. And I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Shiraz. Dee?
Shiraz, every time I hear you deliver that poem, it like just hits me in the heart, like in the chest. So thank you for those words. My name is Dee Nichols. I am a designer and an artivist. Currently, I am based in Memphis, Tennessee. This is the indigenous land of the Choctaw, the Quapaw, and the Chickasaw. And I'll be sharing my screen to talk a little bit about how co-production has manifested across some of the works that are featured in the publication, but also some of the works that I'm working on right now with people across the nation. So I want to, of course, start by thanking Shanti, JB, Gina, and the American Ethnologists team at large for featuring all of us in this volume of works. It was quite an honor to have one of our pieces on the cover, which is the mirror casket. Many of the people who were a part of this publication were a part of this project, in particular, even as they were sharing individual ones. So I definitely want to uplift the name of Damon Davis and Mallory Nizam and Elizabeth Vega, who couldn't join today because the work that we have all created continues to be co-created together. But during this time period, there were a few other projects that I was co-leading with people, in some which, like the Faces of the Movement project, which feature many of the artists who are in this publication. And I wanted to share a little bit about this one because it doesn't always get as much attention. This was a project co-produced with a local photographer, Attilio Agostino, as well as an activist named Charles Wade. And it was a daily production of taking protesters from the streets of Ferguson, welcoming them into a home and studio space, allowing space to share their own stories, and culminating with these amazing photos of who they are and how they wanted to portray it outside of how the media was portraying us. And this was something that, you know, in terms of archiving and chronicling the movement, it lasted for months. But in the midst of co-production, the reason that it ended was because of the personal demons that each one of us may or may not be bringing into a space that affects our ability to collaborate. One of the organizers of this project, Charles Wade, ended up having a lot of legal issues with sex trafficking and had a lot of tensions with people on the ground. And he wasn't from St. Louis, he wasn't from Ferguson, he lived there while doing this project, but all of that played into the ways in which these projects started to manifest over time. So I would definitely love to hold space for us to talk about with another project for a while. This became another space of chronicling the stories of people, being able to walk door to door with a camera that we got from Mike Pagano from the 9 Network, and be able to talk to real residents and neighbors across Ferguson in order to hear their sides of the stories and the different perspectives that people were living with as we were protesting and walking and marching in and out of their neighborhoods. And this culminated in a public projection and video installation in the midst or the heart of the city, our media commons, and allowing space for people who were disconnected from what was going on across the region to have a space of entry in order to learn about some of the stories of residents from the area. Now today, and there are lots of projects that we worked on, and just to uplift Elizabeth Vega once again, she and I were co-organizers of Artivist STL, which is still going on through her efforts as a leader in the city, in the art house that she uses in order to organize space and feed the people and feed the creativity of other activists and protesters, even as more issues come into play. But for me today, I'm organizing, or I'm serving as a core organizer of an effort called Designers Protest, which is a different means of co-production because it's come out of this current wave of protests against police brutality following the murder of George Floyd. And because it came out of this pandemic, it is completely virtual. And co-production in this means finding a deeper ground of commonality beyond one entry point, beyond one experience. And for us, that commonality is about design justice. We know that from Dr. Cornel West, his perspective on justice is that it is what love looks like in public. It is our opinion that design justice is what love looks like in public space. And so we have organized hundreds of designers, BIPOC primarily. And if you don't know what BIPOC means, that's Black, Indigenous, and other folks who identify as people of color. We're organizing ourselves to challenge the privilege and power structures that use architecture and design as tools of oppression, and then radically use our skills collaboratively to co-produce reparations in the built environment through the same processes of design. Now, there are 9 demands that guide our work, and I won't dive into these, but you can see on the screen that they include divesting, investing, a lot of alignment with the larger movement for Black lives as we start to organize in collaboration with more grassroots organizations and teams across the nation, providing design services, building installations, just being creative in the messaging so that there's consistency not only as we're marching through the streets, but also in the practices, in the industries that have some sense of power and control about how murder is able to happen in the middle of the day, in the middle of Black communities, and what that looks like if we can shift it using our skills at play. I won't dive into the heart of our work, but you can see it goes across different waves of action. But what I do want to share about are the ways in which we're bringing together designers across different cities in order to protest using the traditional look and feel of a protest sign, but reimagining them to be sculptures. And so we've collected a bunch of signs and messages from the different movements that we are all coming into this from. But in the midst of bringing these all together, they're developing across different cities as these pop-up monuments and sculptures that in some ways provide spaces of defense, but also spaces of entry in order to get more people aligned with some of the messaging of this larger movement. In addition to works like this, one of the things that I'm working on right now is actually a book, a creative nonfiction book in the UK that is collaborating with illustrators and artists across the world, largely the UK, the US, and parts of South Asia. But this same process of co-production, bringing our visual voices and our senses of using art as protest to the forefront so that this is a guide and a toolkit for younger generations who are still developing their visual voices. And so it integrates a lot of those histories. It integrates a lot of the stories and narratives of artists who've taken to the street across geographies and across different causes as well. And then finally, for the individual works that I am creating, there's a lot of drive for me to still create space for others to co-produce and co-create it. This is an image of a billboard that is currently being installed in St. Louis. And as it's being developed as a printed static image on a billboard, there is AR technology that we're integrating into it that's feeding in more of the things, the values, the rights that community members are fighting for, so that when you hold up your phone to this static image, this work of art, this billboard, you can see all of those messages over time. So I definitely want to have with all of you a deeper conversation about what does it look like to co-produce from the jump with people? What does it look like to co-produce with communities in the midst of this pandemic? But also for the individual works that we're creating, what does it look like to invite people in?
Thank you. Powerful, Dee. Thank you. Gina?
Mute yourself. Unmute yourself. So I began with the name of Eveline Sincere, who was a young student who was studying for a baccalaureate in Delma in Haiti, who was kidnapped, repeatedly raped and tortured, and her body was thrown on the trash November 2nd because her sister could not pay or was not able to pay in time the ransom they had asked for her life. The kidnappers initially demanded $100,000 US, impossible in Haiti. That amount was eventually reduced to 15,000 gourd, which is $238. $238. George Floyd's life was extinguished before our eyes for a mere $20, right? So I keep thinking about value, the value of our lives on this continent and this so-called new world, and how the very conditions of our presence here also began with exchanges of all kinds. I am reminded of, because this I deeply thought about many years ago when I was doing my dissertation fieldwork in Kingston, Jamaica. I had a conversation with Sarah Menley, and it was about what was happening to the value of life in Jamaica at the time. And I remember Sarah said, Black life is cheap. We're Jamaicans, we don't like anything cheap. So I put that here. What I want to bring into this space at the same time, and I'm so glad that JB began by saying, yes, we're talking about death, but we also want to celebrate and recognize life and living, because I do think the conversation we're having today is being had and has been had and continues to be had, especially by minoritized folks in the academy. And we've been having these conversations for a long time. And I'm reminded of something that Robin D.G. Kelley said, and this was in June. There was a conversation at the, it was the University of California Humanities Center. And he said, and I'm gonna quote, "To define ourselves by social death does not define how we make breath." And he had evoked a poem by a poet, a gardener named Ross Gay, about Eric Gardner, and the fact that Eric Gardner at one point worked in Parks and Recreation. And what did he do with his hands? Like, we remember him dying, we remember him being killed, but we don't remember how he lived, what his relationship to the earth was. So I also want to bring that in connection with Edwidge Danticat, someone else who I'm thinking with, who invoked Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, where she talked about our forebears, our ancestors who somehow managed to create, became martyrs, saints, bodies became shrines, what it means to create dangerously for people who are and will eventually read dangerously. And part of what Danticat was asserting was that for a lot of us who right, or in this moment, or in these moments, or in the past, at some point, what we do make can and has the potential to be seen as dangerous. And we are certainly living in a time, in a political moment that where things are beyond exacerbated. And one of the things that I like to say, and I say it in part because it's true, but I say it because I feel it needs to be said aloud, which is I grew up under a dictatorship. And I did grow up under a dictatorship. I don't think I had any inkling of how much that had seeped into my being and my way of being in the world until the last 4 years, when things really started to get even more pronounced than they were already. And, you know, memories that I didn't even know I had began to surface. So this idea then that what it means, what is my responsibility as someone who has a sensibility towards what this moment has brought forth. And so I like to say I have a very difficult relationship with silence. And I bring that up in part because I think in this moment, in this time, in this moment where self-assessment, self-determination is at our foreground, I am more than humbled by the fact that we are, when I say we here, I mean mostly Black folk, who live with this moment and have to endure the shock, the surprise of folks who can't believe that after enduring what we endured for the last 4 years, that that man would gain as many votes as he has thus far. I've been nice and kind, but I've also been very direct in feeling the need to assert that when all you know how to do is be white, you can't even begin to comprehend what it means to live in the bodies that we do. When all you know how to do is be white, you cannot even begin to comprehend what it means for us to live in the bodies that we do. That's more than an assertion on my part. It is something that I think we don't say enough. We say it to each other. We say it amongst ourselves. We tend to not have that conversation in mixed company. This moment, I believe, is allowing us maybe something of a reprieve for a brief moment, some of us. And as far as the brutality that we are too intimate with is becoming more visible. That every day, every single moment of every single day violence. I mean, I take a look at some people, I'm like, you couldn't last being Black for 5 minutes. You just couldn't. You just couldn't. You'd call it a microaggression and that wouldn't do much of anything, actually. Because the reality of what it means to be present, aware, self-assured, remain directed, have focus, have a sense of self, and maintain an internal grounding, because it has to be within. It is in our interiority. It is not outside of us. When we have to navigate institutions, places not made in our image. So I bring all of this up for us to think and have this conversation about, and I don't necessarily want to have that conversation, just to be frank, about the limits of anthropology, Black liberation in anthropology. And I just want to also invoke something from yesterday, just yesterday. I'm now at University of Santa Cruz, and the Center for Cultural Studies had a colloquia with Savannah Grunge of Shangay and Gina Dent and Debbie Gold. And they kept bringing up the question of the university. What is the role of the university in this moment? So as we are interested in having this conversation about anthropology, we can't have it about anthropology without having it about the university. And Vega, who's not here yesterday, actually brought that up, right? Because we are in this moment of something of a collapse. And I think some people needing to kind of anchor themselves are likely to think, no, we're not collapsing, right? Because otherwise you don't have anything to hold on to. And then some of us who've always lived in tectonic shifts on plates, knowing that there's no guarantees that it can move and shake at any point in time, know that there is a collapse. And so then the question is, what can we, or do we want to imagine in this moment as things are shifting? And this may be an opportunity to create anew. For me, I go back to the folks that I mentioned earlier. If creating anew does not include apoetics, I'm not seeing much of interest in it personally for me, which is one of the reasons that I begin with, and I work with the art now more than ever, because I think the room for expression is where that space is. So I just wanted to say that. And then one of the things that I wanted to do, because I'm wrapping up, is I wanted to read a little piece, and it's not even a minute or about 2 minutes long, from a project that I have that is an ongoing project, and it's called Black Liberation Mashup. What it is actually text quotes from writers from across the Black diaspora. So by invoking, the brutal murder of this young girl, I also wanted to make sure that this conversation about Blackness is a diasporic one, right? Because when we're talking about Black life, we're talking about Black life globally. So that's really important to me as well. So the little piece that I want to read is one of the stanzas from Black Liberation Mashup, and it's got some of my favorite writers in there. But if we're talking about liberation, if we're talking about anthropology, and if we're talking about Blackness, I think this is a place to go, and I'd be happy to talk more about this. So here we go. The world recreated humankind is master of a new fate, strengthened by a new experience of life. The fruitfulness of this admirable doctrine, that it poses to each of us the immediate problems from which it is impossible to shy away without cowardice. It is now vital to dare to know oneself, to dare to confess to oneself what one is, to dare to ask oneself what one wants to be. Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. Revolution begins with the self, in the self. For the space between power and vulnerability is not just an edge. There is room there. There is room for deference, humility, surrender, and grace. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. David, who on the screen you'll see him as Damon Davis, but it's actually David Kirkman. I'll turn it over to you.
I have no problem being Damon Davis for a while. I look up to him. He's an incredible guy. How do I follow that up? Gina, that was like extremely powerful. Dee, that was amazing. Shiraz, that was like, I thought that was actually my first time hearing that poem. And so like, I felt that on every level. For me, growing up in Ferguson. So, I grew up in Ferguson. I went to, high school there, middle school there, elementary school there, and things like that. I remember about my senior year of high school, we ended up moving out to the Maryland Heights area. And so for most of my life, pretty much all of what I experienced were were, people who looked like me, most people who thought like me, and, things like that. And then I move out into a space where I am trying to figure out where my Blackness fits in. And so it's it became a very, and I believe every Black person has that moment where we're just like, at some point in our lives where we just figure out, man, I got to figure out like where exactly the essence of who I am, like where does that space that is not necessarily been constructed for me. And we move out into this predominantly white area, and I'm immediately confronted, or not confronted, I won't say confronted, but definitely challenged with on how to go about, just navigating through certain spaces. And I'm figuring myself out, obviously, like, you're 18, you're 17, 18 years old, you're trying to figure yourself out. And a lot of us are still trying to figure ourselves out. And then you graduate, you go to college, and now I'm at Webster University, and now I'm in a even more predominantly white space and trying to figure myself out. At the same time, I'm coming to grips with just who I am as, as a Black gay, man, and things like that. And you realize that ultimately you really get to set and construct how you want a lot of who you are. Really, you really get to construct who you are and the essence of who you are. But from day one, society is challenging you. You're Black. You don't belong here. And even if it's not in a very aggressive way, there are subtleties that you encounter. There's microaggressions that you encounter in a lot of these spaces. And so I'm figuring myself out in college. I never actually finished college. And it was in that moment where, and in that particular, I guess in church, we'd say like that particular season of my life, right? In that particular season of my life, I really began to grow who I am and how do I begin to really fit in this society. And how I began to figure that out was by just living and not doing what people told me to do, not taking on the baggage of who people said I was or who I am, but simply living life. I discover more of my Blackness. I discover really who I am as a person. And I feel that, I'm really new to like this anthropology space, and, really creating the Ferguson Forum video has been really pretty amazing for me, just to really get a glimpse into see how does Blackness begin to fit in this space, and how do Black people navigate this field that wasn't necessarily constructed for us. And I think that's going to be a great cause for, the rest of the conversation. But that's really all I have to say. I don't, again, I just wanted to circle back to, again, I think the main thing is how do we begin to navigate this space in a very powerful way that can be impactful for people who are looking at our work and reading our work. And, you have people like Dee and Elizabeth Vega and JB and Shanti, I think, and Gina, of course, and Shiraz, and all these amazing people who are a part of this and deeply, deeply embedded a part of in this. And I think the question is, how does our Blackness really fit in? And so that's really all I have to say. I don't know if that made sense, but yeah.
Good, thank you, David. And again, even though the name on the screen is Damon Davis, that is David Kirkman. And in the chat, I have been putting links to all of their work so that you can see it. We have a few questions that we just wanted to follow up on. And I think, David, what you said is one of them. Within anthropology, we talk a lot about how to reimagine anthropology, whether it should, or in what way it should be reimagined as a discipline that is so tied to the colonial enterprise, and also as a discipline who is sometimes makes our the matters that we represent groups that are marginalized, because we do want to show humanity, we do want to show daily life, love, living. Just thoughts from the panelists in terms of the conversation, and David, you started to talk about it. What, you all have now gotten to know a lot about anthropology. How can anthropology be most useful? As somebody who's collaborated with anthropologists, how as anthropologists can we do our work differently? Should we destroy anthropology? How can it be most productive? Anybody can jump in. Dee?
Me first, my gosh, the pressure. I think right now, as our nation and our society is transforming into a whole new existence, there's a lot of opportunity right now. Part of that is looking at our norms, our behaviors in ways that are more collective from the jump, more collaborative from the jump, not necessarily just going into homes or communities or spaces or movements to study, but in some ways to help translate what the story that is already on people's hearts. I think that we have, and people in general have, so much within ourselves that we've already been thinking about, that we've already been speculating, that we've already been envisioning. And what does it look like for anthropologists to be like some, I don't know the word for it, but like some ways helping to, I don't want to say extract, that sounds nasty, but like in some ways be able to help us further define, refine, in some ways, what's already there. I'm sure I'll have more thoughts on this as the conversation unfolds, but I think right now there's an opportunity to reimagine what the field can do in real time, as we're all rediscovering who we are across cultures.
Yeah, and I agree with Dee on that point, because I'm always curious if anthropologists who go into the field, if they are truly interested in engaging the curiosity that people who currently inhabit the space, who have made the space, if they understand that people are also curious about that space, and that there is a lot of uncovering that some community members even want to do with the spaces that they live in. So I'm just curious about that relationship versus coming in and treating communities as specimens, if you will, for the lack of a better term, and coming in with their thoughts and perspectives, and but also at the same time, if they're being ethical about their practice, making sure that they are obtaining the knowledge in a way that, to Dee's point, that is more so in partnership. So I guess I would like to see more dialogue, more open dialogue, amongst the profession and with community.
If I could jump back in. So, I actually don't know that much about anthropology. The university that I attended for a long time didn't have anthropology, I believe. I think it had sociology. But that's neither here nor there. The thing that's on my heart right now, mainly because race is top of mind, and my assumption is that the field of anthropology is not one that has, I don't want to say this nicely, actually. I can assume that it is a white field. And right now, we need less white people studying other cultures and other people. We need white people studying white people. Because even if we look at what is happening in our nation presently with the elections, there are some nuances there. The commitment, the tetheredness to white fragility, as I like to say it, there's something there that needs to be further analyzed, understood, and it's not upon BIPOC researchers, anthropologists, sociologists, whatever, to do that work. In many ways, if we're thinking about the words of like James Baldwin and the double consciousness and other scholars who've been in that part of the field of racial identity politics and understanding, we've learned a lot already about what that whiteness includes. But I don't think that white people have done enough to shift some things in that regard. And so that's one thing that's on my heart that I think is another opportunity for the anthropologists in the room.
And Gina, and you're absolutely right in terms of, and whiteness becomes an unmarked category, a category that does not have an ability to be deconstructed. It becomes the norm. So Gina?
Yes, I just wanted to tag on to what Dee was saying, because in the afterword to the special issue, that's where Ken and I ended up, right? That the work that's being done, whether it's from anything from decolonizing to letting it burn, in anthropology, that's sort of like really critical look on it, has been done almost primarily by folks who are marginalized. And what you also have is this epistemic division of labor as a result, right? And then the fact that whiteness remains unmarked. And I know that the American Anthropologist is not the recent issue, but the issue before we went to print, right? Where Jemima Pierre and I can't remember her name, edited a special section, right? Of that journal, in which they specifically spoke to thinking about anthropology as white supremacy. I mean, so the history of the discipline, its current practices, especially professional practices, which is one of the reasons that the Ferguson Forum was so important. And I know personally for me, I was just like, oh my God, I died and I went to decolonize anthropology heaven. And it was like, I'm in St. Louis at the AES conference. Elizabeth Chin just sent us the resource for that. So I think that's a really important point. And where we are in this country right now, when people are still saying, we're not quite sure how 45, he remains an aberration. And I'm like, he remains an aberration because you don't want to admit to racism, to that history of racism in this country that's so deep in the very fabric of this society. So, and we've done that work, but they need to do that work. Us doing the work, because there's this weird kind of service aspect to us having to keep teaching, right? As opposed to you do your own critical self-reflection, because that's actually what's needed at this point. We have other things we need to do. And I think Leith Mullings said that really well in one of her pieces many, many years ago. So the fact that we're still having these conversations over and over again is also part of the point.
And Jeff Martin is telling us we have 5 minutes left. Now we have 4. So JB, do you want to say something? And then I'll say something. And if somebody else has.
As usual, when we get together, it sparks a lot of thought. And all of you are quite inspiring in that way. One of the things I've always had a quite ambivalent relationship to anthropology. And so I went back and tried to think about why did I even start this career trajectory? And so I started anthropology at a small liberal arts college in the Midwest. And I took anthropology and I stayed with it because at that time it felt like sanctuary. It felt like a space that offered me a new way to engage with the world, a new way to be me in the context of a university or college setting in which there was constant racial harassment, right? So it became the sanctuary. But then as I move forward in my career, I've come to feel that anthropology has become less a sanctuary and more of a prison. But I want to hold both of these together. And what do we want to preserve? What do we want to keep? And what do we want to jettison? Because I think the discipline has much to offer. And I think we need to do the hard work again and then again of trying to figure out what that is. And I think we need to think about transmission. And so art is a form of transmission. Publication is a form of transmission. We need to ask ourselves, what are we going to leave behind? And are our junior scholars, the graduate students, are they going to have to do the same fight? And it feels like at this point, unless we make some radical change, there'll be another forum like this, and we'll have another set of conversations like this. Well, those are my thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, no, Jeff reminds me we have a minute left. So we are supposed to say that we can meet up in one of the virtual chat hallways. And to some of the participants' comments, that's where we can see each other. I think I'm just supposed to pick one, if that is right, Jeff. I'm saying virtual hallway number 2. I'll put the link in the chat. And it is, again, virtual hallway 2 if people want to continue the conversation. I became an anthropologist because I love listening and learning from people who are doing the work on the ground. So everybody on this this panel are people who inspire me, and I love listening to people's narratives and how people locally find meaning, find life and joy and love in the context of historical Black violence, anti-Blackness, anti-BIPOC, and just seeing how imaginations can try to transform the world, and what the project of abolition and destroying powers of supremacy, whether it be white or patriarchy or heteronormativity, what that actually means. And I hope that's what this has illuminated, is that we can take seriously asking participants who we engage with, what does the reimagined world look like? And what is our role as anthropologists, and what is your role as people who we come together to co-produce and collaborate with? Stacy Pigg is on, I see, so I want to thank her for being the editor of American Ethnologist who allowed us to do this. Thank you, Stacy, because I know it was a risk. And thank you, Jeff, for being the tech person, and also to the captioner, Beth. To David, Shiraz, Dee, Gina, thank you. And to my co-editor, JB, love you. It's been great working with you. See everybody in virtual hallway 2. Peace.